Hello, it's Emily Wishall, your host for Radical Embodiment, and I am so excited for today's conversation. Today, I get to interview a dear friend of mine, Amy Young. So, Amy Young is a coach and guide to women who are committed to patriarchal deprogramming and the energetic dissolution of our dysfunctional masculine paradigm. If you're listening to that and you're like, what the heck does that mean? But are intrigued, definitely listen to the full interview as we dissect what that means. And Amy clarifies exactly not only what that means, but how to apply it to your own life. Amy has been supporting women online globally for a decade, offering heart-hitting, no BS advice via her YouTube channel, as well as her solo podcast, Just What You Needed. To learn more about Amy's work, you can visit her website, amyyoungcoaching.com. And I have that and her Instagram linked. And I feel like this interview was really juicy. We go into, what embodiment means to Amy, the first steps in the embodiment journey, and how anyone, no matter where they are in their journey towards loving themselves, loving their body, can start beginning to live a more embodied life. So go ahead and take a listen to the episode. I hope you enjoy. Hello, everyone. Here I am with Amy Young. Amy, thanks for being here. I'm really excited just to dive in with you and hear your wisdom and what you have to offer on the subject of embodiment and loving our bodies themselves.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here too.
So the first question I always ask all my guests is, what does embodiment mean to you?
Yeah, I love this question. Embodiment to me, and this was a working definition that I've kind of borrowed from one of my teachers, Michaela Boehm, who described it in this really simple, beautiful way of embodiment being your capacity to receive the messages that your body is sending to you. Like, how available are you for whatever messages your body is trying to send to you? We can talk about that on a biological level in terms of like hunger cues. Ooh, I'm tired. Ooh, I want to move. Ooh, something feels tight. We can talk about it on an emotional level, on the level of the nervous system or dysregulation. And I also, with my work with women, talk about it on the level of intuition and your feminine intelligence. So my work with women in the realm of embodiment is enhancing that capacity, that ability to really listen internally and interpret whatever messages our body is offering to us.
Yeah. I love that definition too. The capacity to receive the messages your body is trying to send to you. So simple, yet there's so much depth there to piece out. So from that, Amy and I, as I think most podcast interviews with most people seem to go, you have a little conversation before. And I was sharing with her, with radical embodiment, the overarching belief that I'm operating from is the more that we learn to become embodied, which isn't just like snap your fingers and like, oh, I'm so embodied. It's an ongoing everyday practice and choice. But the more that we learn to inhabit our body, I believe the more that a natural byproduct is we learn to accept and love our bodies. And so I'm curious if you agree with that and what you would say to that.
Yeah. I'd love that you kind of posed this initially to me as like, well, yeah, this is like the lens that I'm viewing this through. Like, are you also viewing it through this lens, embodiment work? And my initial response is like, yes, absolutely. In the sense that, and I believe this is kind of true for anything that we want to deepen our relationship to. And I look at embodiment as like deepening the relationship that you have with your body, like creating more internalized intimacy and safety within yourself and curiosity within yourself, all of these things. I mean, anything that we're engaging with on a deeper level like that, the relationship is going to be improved, meaning there probably will be a higher level of acceptance, respect, regard, care, consideration, love, all of those things. The one thing that I added as like a little asterisk caveat onto that is, while I believe that's true in the long term, I have seen, and I've experienced this as well myself, that if we're just starting to befriend our bodies or even just tune in,
Yeah.
it won't always feel like love and acceptance and ooey gooey, yay, yum, right away. Like,
no,
not even close. Like when
No.
when I was really first starting to, I mean, it sounds silly to say it this way, but it's true. When I was starting to like admit that like I have a body, like, you know what I mean? Like really becoming more aware of like, whoa, like my body is actually like trying to talk to me and send signals to me.
I like how I'm just going to interject for a moment.
Yeah.
I like how you just said that even just when you first started to admit that you have a body.
Yeah.
Because that is key, because I think until we start into this journey, whatever entryway is, everyone's is unique. Often we don't think about our body unless it's in pain to some
100%.
degree, like a loud pain or anxiety response. And yeah, and so just even admitting, oh, right, my body exists and has cues and messages, and it's telling me things and other avenues other than these really loud, confronting responses.
Well, and it's interesting you say that, because what brought me into embodiment work, like when I kind of backed into this whole realm of, like personal wellness and personal development, and that, is an aspect of embodiment work, it was because I started experiencing chronic pain in my body. And up until that point, I had been really treating my body like it was just like this little vehicle that helped my mind, like move around and do what my mind wanted to do. So when I did start dropping in and actually feeling what was coming up for me internally, on the level of physical pain, but then also, stressors and anxiety and overwhelm and all these things that I'd really been avoiding and suppressing for a long time, I did not feel good in any of that. Like I did not feel, there was no warm fuzzies between me and my body for a while. Like it was a lot of feeling what I hadn't been feeling. And that's something that I wish maybe people would talk a little bit more about and I know that you have this experience with your clients as well, that like when we're dipping our toes in or starting to really tune in from the neck down, it can be really confronting. And I know even for me, like it felt scary sometimes, because I was like, I'm not used to orienting to myself or my life in this way. And suddenly there's way more sensation and things that I'm used to kind of numbing out or not experiencing that really threw me for a loop.
Totally. I think I totally agree with the word. It can be really confronting. It can be overwhelming, even when, if there's been a history, a pattern that unfortunately, I think a lot of us have in today's world and culture and just modernized ways of living and being, of suppressing to some degree, of numbing to some degree, of kind of bottling up or trying to compartmentalize our emotions of, okay, well, just had this experience, but now I'm going to work. So I just need to like tuck that away. And as we start opening ourselves up to increasing our capacity to be with what is, that initially isn't, normally like, oh, wow, bliss, it's amazing. It's actually like, oh, wow, like there's so much loneliness, or wow, there's like this depth of sadness, or there's this grief or resentment or anger or jealousy, and along with maybe some deep levels of like joy and pleasure and ecstasy. But part of, I think, as we increase our capacity to even be with more lighter feeling, I call them more higher vibration emotions, also then it inevitably we have to open ourselves up to feeling more of those lower frequency vibrations, which would be those discomforts that often we don't want to feel and can feel really, really freaking scary. And because I think there's so much unknown. And so I always am like such a fan of having some degree of support for anybody when they're in this journey, so that you don't feel so alone in it. So you have a place to feel like you can lean back and rest, right? Someone's got you, or you're, I'm such a fan of having really physical practices, some sort of really supportive, restorative yoga pose, for example, where your back is so held from bolsters beneath as you start diving into some emotions, sensations in your physical and energetic bodies that might feel really scary. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it makes a lot of sense.
So do you mind sharing just a little bit more, and as much as you're comfortable sharing, with your own story? You said it was just kind of going into physical pain is kind of what opened you up, but do you mind just, whatever degree you want to share of how through the physical pain is what led you into, admitting, I have a body other than just, it's what moves my mind around, and what your experience of starting to uncover more aspects of yourself in that embodiment journey was like?
Yeah. It's funny because I always reflect on the instances in my life where like I can look backwards and see that my body was like beckoning to me, or that there were these invitations for me to explore embodiment before I even knew what embodiment was. Or I think about, myself as a practitioner and a coach, like when I was going through my coach training, there would be a lot of emphasis on, noticing like what your client's body is doing and bringing people into whatever their physical experience was. And, I'm like a hardcore, like Northeast, like urban city chick. And there was all this like kind of cultural influence that I feel like I wasn't fully aware of. I was born and raised in Boston and then lived in New York for a decade. And just like the idea of tuning into one's body felt really like, for lack of a better term, very like woo woo to me. Like it just felt really like, what's the point of that? I don't get it. It sounds goofy. It makes me uncomfortable. I think it makes other people uncomfortable. Like, I just don't want to do that. So I just was very unaware. It was one of those things where I'm like, I didn't know what I didn't know. And in early 2019, I was in a season of my life where, I joke about this, but it's really true. Like I was killing it. Like if you looked at my life on paper, it was like every box that you could want to check was really getting checked in my life, where my business was really taking off and I was very successful and getting invitations to like partake in all of these cool collaborations and making a lot of money. And I was in this new relationship with this person that I was like, this person, checks all my boxes and is what I want. And on the outside and on a mental level, I was like, wow, I'm killing it. Like my life is going so well. And what I wasn't aware of and what I was actually working really hard to kind of not pay a lot of attention to was how exhausted and depleted I was. And how much I was really operating on the brink of burnout for a very long time. And it wasn't until halfway through 2019, I started experiencing really intense chronic pain that was totally like undiagnosable, mysterious, and was completely kind of failed by Western medicine, which is a really scary experience to have as someone who'd always kind of felt like, doctors know what's going on and like they'll be able to help me with something. That I really kind of just decided, as someone who really, I live my life sort of under the belief system that like everything is happening for me. And this isn't by accident. And there's something here that I'm meant to like learn and expand into. Like I have to trust that this is what's supposed to be happening right now. And that like this pain is trying to teach me and show me something. So I started tuning into my body and just getting curious about like what's going on here. Like what have I not really been aware of, or what is my body trying to communicate to me? And this is the only way that it knows how, because the body's signals and whispers and nudges aren't always so obvious and clear, easy to interpret. So on a personal level, that was really
I just want to say that's like such a, like, yes, you're in chronic pain and like, that's like, okay, like, you're trying all these things, nothing is helping. And still like making that choice of actually going into giving yourself this time and space to what is going on in my body, what is it wanting to tell me, is so profoundly courageous.
Oh, thank you for saying that.
I believe that. I mean, it's such a courageous choice, because it is scary, especially when you're in a loud pain response. It's like, it's the last thing you probably want to do is go and be with the pain.
Well, totally. And it was this crazy thing where I remember just kind of, I'm like, okay, options on the table are either like, I probably could get like a prescription for like painkillers. Do you know what I mean? And just kind of like numb out, and maybe that would help me for a little while. And, or yeah, like I have to look at this like through the deepest spiritual lens I can, which is what I've always like, taught and preached and teached, is like, everything's happening for you. So I was like, if I don't take my own medicine here, then what kind of teacher am I, So I really just started deep diving into, like my own inner experience. I really shifted a lot of things in my life as a result of kind of the messages that my body was sending to me about what she wanted or what she needed or what was going to work or wasn't going to work anymore. And I started completely rearranging my life around what my body was communicating to me. And from there, I mean, again, it's like I really backed into so many things. I ended up working with a somatic psychologist before I even knew what somatic psychology was. I wanted to do equine therapy because I was curious about horses, and I was like, my body just wants to be around animals right now. And so I started just learning more about the world of somatic experiencing and like working with your body in a therapeutic sense. At the same time, I was really getting into Michaela Boehm's work and practicing nonlinear movement. And it was like this confluence of all these things that were just weaving together to sort of say like, hey, it's like, it's time to get back into your body. And like, it's time to heal some things, and it's time to slow down, and it's time to listen on a deeper level. And also like I was undergoing a really profound spiritual awakening in terms of activating more of my feminine intelligence and my feminine channel and understanding masculine versus feminine energetics. So it was like all of these things swirled together sort of all at once and created this big opening for me to just expand my worldview and the work that I do with women, and also how I operate, on a personal level. So, I mean, that's like the most nutshell version I can kind of give.
Well, I'm even just thinking of you were describing yourself before as like this urban culture girl, from Boston and the New York City. And now you're talking about like, you had this opening to feminine intelligence and and I'm like, I speak, that's like the language I speak. And I'm just thinking of others listening or others, I'm like, whoa, how did you get there? And so do you mind like speaking, what do you mean about even like opening yourself into feminine intelligence? And you speak about, in your work that one of the things you support women in doing is patriarchal deprogramming. And I'm imagining that that's a part of the own process you went through as you were tuning in more into your body, as you were healing from this chronic pain loop. So I'd love for you to speak to that.
Yeah. And I'll speak to it because I can go very like broad and wide with things, but I'll try to also kind of stay within the framework of this conversation, right? About embodiment. So
you can start wide, and then I can ask for, if I feel like I can, ask for specific examples, share whatever.
Yeah. So the work that I do, is within the realm of what I call the energetics of patriarchal deprogramming, which is really about dissolving internalized misogyny. And when I talk about patriarchy and misogyny, I'm not talking about it from a socio-political perspective. I'm not talking about it as like the function of patriarchy, in a more traditional lens where it's kind of just like, oh, a culture where men are in positions of power. My version of patriarchy is speaking to the global phenomenon of 5,000-year-old history, eons of oppression focused on deprioritizing, demonizing, and dismissing the feminine, and prioritizing and overvaluing the masculine. And, these energetic poles and principles, masculine and feminine, I tell people like, if that language doesn't make sense to you, is activating for you, like there's, these are lineages from a lot of Eastern traditions that have different names, and you can also kind of call it whatever you want to call it if it's going to help you glom onto it a little bit more. But the masculine
what would be another for that example? What other names do you offer to people?
Oh, like yin and yang energy, is masculine, feminine, like Shiva and Shakti, like that's masculine, feminine. But when I'm teaching,
I feel like if somebody couldn't do feminine, masculine, they couldn't do Shiva and Shakti. But like
you
yin
never
and yang,
know.
they could get,
You
that's true.
never know.
That's true.
I
That's
tell
true.
people like call it pickles and popcorn if it'll help
Yeah.
you out, you know,
Yeah.
like if it's going to give you a framework
Yeah.
of understanding for yourself,
Yes.
like I don't
Just
really
shift the word.
I'm sure there's people who would be like, that's sacrilegious, but I'm not friends with those people anyway. So, so the masculine is really like the way that the world is sort of run as we know it, meaning that, yeah, like I said, we value and prioritize masculine principles and energetics over the feminine. And in the realm of this conversation, for example, you know, if we're talking about like the body and your lived experience, the masculine end of the spectrum is like your rational, logical thinking, mental self. So like functions of the mind or like problem solving or like linear thinking, that's all within the realm of the masculine. And if you look at our traditional education systems, like I was raised, you know, going to public school, K through 12, we teach people how to think critically. I mean, there's people who would argue we actually don't teach that at all, but that's hopefully one of the objectives of traditional education is like, you know, I want you to be able to think about things and problem solve and analyze and evaluate a lot of these sort of like mental functions. On the feminine end of the spectrum, we have your emotional self, your feeling self, your sensual self, like the part of you that's actually like sensory aware, and your intuitive self. So it's these aspects of consciousness that aren't necessarily as easily understandable or something that we can just kind of like chart on a graph. It's like you feel something and maybe you don't really know why you feel it, or you have this intuitive sense or this, you know, when we talk about like a gut knowing about something, but you can't necessarily pinpoint what it is that's making you feel that way or perceive that. So we live in a society where that which is known and clear and certain and rational and reasonable, that which is masculine is revered and respected. And that which is feminine, meaning, you know, emotional, having to do with your intuitive knowing, the mysteries of the body, the things that can't be explained, that can't be, you know, we can't like take an x-ray of an emotion, you know, like we can do like heat graphs in people's bodies, but it's mysterious. We just don't have the same level of respect or reverence for that level of, what I refer to as a feminine intelligence. And as someone knowing myself now, I didn't know this for a long time, but as a feminine essenced being, like I have a highly feminine system, and living in a world, and when I say a dysfunctional masculine paradigm, I am just referring to the fact that we subjugate and suppress the feminine, so things are out of balance in this world that we're in. I really learned to mistrust and really dismiss like my feminine capacities, you know, like my own intuition, my ability to feel, sense, know things. I didn't trust those things within myself. And for a really long time, like for the first 3 decades of my life, I would say like my mind was pretty much just running the show. So I'll pause there because I feel like I'm maybe getting away from your initial question, but like,
no, you're not.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So a lot of the work that I do with my clients now, and what I find that
well, before you go into that, if you don't mind, actually, because I just want to clarify what you were just saying, because I think it was a really awesome point of one, how you were defining, you know, dysfunctional masculine paradigm and bringing that more internal into how for you, it led you to not trusting your internal subtle cues. And so what I'd love to have you speak on and share is, how did you start? Like what specifically, if you could name, you know, and maybe it's more than, I would imagine it's more than one thing, but to give it some tangible essence, what helps support you in learning to trust those cues, and what, you know, might a couple of those cues be that, you know, in regards to how you sensed it? Was it a sensation, an emotion, and what helped you start to trust that?
Yeah. Well, and this is I love having this conversation about like, how do we begin to kind of do the internal spelunking of like interpreting, you know, the signals that our body might be sending to us. So for me, one of the places that I began, I feel like Julie Andrews in The Sound of Music. And she's like, let's start at the very beginning. Very good place to start. The first thing I probably became aware of was like how much I completely ignored the basic bodily functions of like hungry, tired, thirsty, like stressed, overwhelmed, like just the basics of like things my body needs to function. Like my body needs food, my body needs water, my body needs sleep, my body needs sunlight, my body needs a belly laugh, like these things that we're like, oh yeah, I know that I need those things. But
I need to put belly laugh on my daily like desire list.
So
every day I desire to have at least one full. It is important.
Yeah,
it's the best feeling.
Yeah, and we don't get enough of it for sure. Mm-mm. And I had been, at the time that I was kind of waking up to these parts of myself, I was so just like driven and hustle oriented. The pride of my life was that I was like, oh yeah, I don't need to sleep. And I like skip lunch most days. And like, oh my God, I've been sitting at my laptop for 6 hours and I've actually had to pee for 3 of those hours and I didn't even realize it. Like I was really tuned the fuck out.
Yeah.
And just waking up to how out of sync I was with those biological impulses and instincts was pretty bananas, like it was pretty startling to just be like, wow, actually like my body's like starving, or like, oh I'm so tired. Like if I actually touch into how tired I am, I feel like I'm gonna like melt into a puddle on the floor, like really feeling the depth of what essentially like a lifetime of neglect had kind of accumulated in for me was really heavy. So I feel like that answer of just kind of like, even just tuning into those things that we can consider more basic sometimes isn't as like exciting or flashy as we want it to be. I think embodiment gets a lot of like, oh, you're going to be so embodied and like, it's going to be like,
no,
sexy
it's
and
true.
cool.
It's so true though. Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially when you're in that hustle mind or you're creating something or you're working for yourself or for a company, and productivity. I mean, I'm seeing this slowly is shifting, but this paradigm also, speaking of, this patriarchal paradigm, I think a subset of that is productivity is tied into our worth. And it's like a sign of quote unquote success of what you just of like, oh yeah, like I skipped lunch. I don't need to sleep. I can sit at my laptop for 6 hours. I have to pee, but it's like, I can just ignore that. Like, look at me, just go, go, go.
Yeah.
And so I think it is, I mean, of course it's so completely valid, but it's such an important, beautiful beginning piece of embodiment is actually waking yourself up to what's called interoception. Your body's interoceptions are body's internal awareness cues. And those are the most basic, are hunger cue, the cue to pee, the cue of like, are you cold? Yeah.
So many things. And and also understanding that like for me, really waking up internally and starting to pay attention, I realized like my first instinct a lot of times was like, oh, this is so inconvenient actually to my own personal agenda, or like you're speaking to like the primary patriarchal agenda is like productivity, like getting things done. It's very like goal oriented and achievement oriented. And when when my body finally was just like, okay, she's not listening, let's bring in the big guns and like we're going to make her feel some serious pain. It was like, I was like, oh my God, I'm probably gonna have to like cut back on the work that I'm doing. Like I had all these like speaking gigs planned that I was like, oh, I'm gonna have some uncomfortable conversations with people saying like, hey, actually, like I can't fly to Seattle. Like I can't do that conference. I can't come to that thing. I thought that I would be able to. Like embodiment work is not always going to be convenient or comfortable for the parts of us that are hooked into these other agendas that we have, and or these aspects of like, how we see ourselves, that I really prided myself in being a really hardworking, achievement oriented, like highly driven person. And part of my embodiment, journey has been about seeing how like, yes, those things are true. And also if I'm not fully fueled up and like supported and tending to myself, or like, pouring from a full cup, as people like to say, then like all of those efforts and, like trying to be productive, like that's never going to lead me anywhere I want to go anyway.
Yeah.
So it felt a lot like a spell being broken, where it was really like, whoa, what have I been doing? And like, what's the cost of that?
The word is at the tip of my tongue, but when you said like the spell being cast, I think like waking up to this, not full zombie like, but like this is an exaggerative large word, and it might be true, but like almost like this brainwashed state of
Totally
how we think that we should be operating and existing. And I'm appreciating you just speaking to that, because that was going to be one of my questions of, I think, anyone who's wherever they are in their embodiment journey. And I just like to name, like, it's not just, again, you don't snap your fingers or embody. There's so many stages, right? That are continuously can be confronting and continuously can be juicy and yummy. And sometimes I think that it can feel like this elitist or like this another goal thing, right? Of like, okay, I'm doing my embodiment thing, I'm going to feel pleasure. Yeah, at least I can get, I've gotten there. I tend to have an achieving mindset. So I just like to name that there is no end goal. You're never quote unquote there. And I know that something that comes up for people frequently in this process and journey is the time. I just don't have the time to do that practice. I don't have the time to actually check in with how I feel, or what you did, which I'm like, wow, that's so bold. And I can't imagine the discomfort you felt of like, I'm actually legit canceling gigs and I'm letting people down. So I'd love for you to share, any insight, advice, suggestions you have to support people in starting to turn that dial of how can we begin to reprioritize and value what's coming up, our own interoception, our own body cues, and placing more value and prioritization around that versus making other people happy, versus this is what I need to do to get my career going or to fulfill, something external means.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, my head is like swimming with like all kinds of thoughts and feelings and like hardcore rants I want to go on around this, because largely, sometimes I do think about like, oh, if I could go in a time machine back to my former self, like what would I say, because I was totally one of those people that was just like, don't have time for that. I'm on a mission. Like, I can't be bothered. No, thank you. Also uncomfortable. Like, don't really feel like doing any of those things. Don't want to think about my body. Don't really want to like, check in with her, see how she's feeling, let her give me any directives, like yuck. Well, so, I'm like hesitant to say this because I feel like it can sound sort of like fear mongering, but I do want to tell people that it's like, you either start like tuning into your body and taking care of her or him or it or them now, or there will be a point where your body is going to start speaking to you more loudly and letting you know that you really have to. And I, that I preface that with being like, I don't want to fear monger but that was my experience, was so much of just like hitting snooze on my body signals for so long, to the point where there was, that like, whoa, like swift awakening. And not everyone is going to have the experience that I had. I had and am having like a very unique embodied experience this lifetime. And like, I trust that. And it's also a bitch. And like, both of those things are true. But it is one of those things, right, where I can look back even to when I was in college and I would, be like doing all-nighters and writing papers and like getting things done and also going out and partying. And then there would be a point where like, I'd get like a long weekend or something and I would just get sick because my body would be like, oh, this is the only way that we can slow her down. And that's a lot of how I'm wired. And I think that's how a lot of us are wired, is that like, without letting ourselves choose rest, our bodies will often force us to rest. So just pay attention to that, like, just if you're like me and you like hitting snooze, just know that like that comes,
it's not going away.
Yes. Either, like, just right? Like all things come with a cost. It's like, it's not a long-term solution. That's a short-term solution. And I wouldn't even necessarily say solution. So I would just like, I do think it's important. Yeah. Like you're saying, for folks to wake up and realize, it's not going to go away. Like, my need for rest, or my need for more joy, or my need for more pleasure, or my need for more connection, or like my need to nourish myself better. Like these are all just things we put off when we're not willing to actually start prioritizing and making time for them. And then the other thing that I would just say is, like, my experience with embodiment work is that it's a slow journey, and a little can actually go a very long way. That like, I made a lot of swift changes very fast. And that's because my situation was like pretty extreme. And I'm like a balls to the wall sort of person. So when I get into something, I get really, really into it. But you don't have to make a lot of massive changes in your life to start orienting to your body in a more healthful, healing, collaborative way. Like even something like starting off the day or ending the day with like, hand on heart, like a few deep breaths and being like, oh, hey body, like, what do you need in this moment? And just listening for what arises. Those are the kinds of things that cumulatively, if we're talking about time, maybe you spend 2 minutes a day doing that. And like, that's enough, or it's enough for right now. And just a practice like that can have a massive impact. So yeah, like I think, to your point of embodiment work becoming very like goal oriented, or we have a certain image of what it looks like.
Yeah.
It can also be very subtle and be really simple. And like you said, like just finding like your favorite yin yoga pose, or like restorative yoga. Like I used to do just like legs up a wall, for like 5 minutes a day. And sometimes that was the only medicine I really needed that day. And it was perfect.
Exactly. And that makes it so like accessible, right? It's just like 5 minutes. And I even love your example of, the hand on the heart and just checking in briefly how you are. And that's such a simple practice that you can like, I'm such a fan of how can we integrate these ways of being, these practices into things we're already doing. So we're not just like upping our to-do list, which is of course going to just get us more in that achievement mind. But instead find ways of, oh, here I am driving, I'm at a red light, or here I am at the coffee shop waiting in line, places where, or here I am at the gym between sets of my workout where I'm supposed to just rest. What am I going to do? Right. These moments where it's often easy to just get out our phone and scroll or do whatever that usually mindlessness is on our phone, and instead choose to check in.
Yeah.
To choose to literally take the 90 seconds, 30 seconds, 3 minutes, but it's those like consistencies through the day.
Yeah.
And what you said about the subtle, like I see time and time again with my clients, it's those subtle shifts that end up being the most significant. And it brings me even to the word of titration, and thinking of from our nervous system level of wanting to titrate experiences, wanting to titrate our opening to sensations. We've all had differing degrees of trauma. And if it's like a whoa, bam experience, it can not only be really confronting, it can, put you kind of under for a while if you don't have the right support. And so even just that example you gave is so beautiful for just, we can titrate, meaning you're slowly opening yourself up to experiencing more with what is within you, which is really profound. Yeah. And then I wanted to emphasize when you were talking about how can we start prioritizing and placing more value on these practices. I think what you name, not that it's like fear mongering, but it is true, just like to help for all of us to keep in mind, acknowledge and remember that these bodily sensations, these desires, these wants, these feelings we have aren't just going away if we're choosing not to be with them or acknowledge them. And so I think the more we can remember, even just remembering that can be helpful of, not to judge yourself if you do have a moment of like, oh, I'm just going to power through, be gentle with yourself, and, maybe craft out time that later that day, or, okay, next time I go to the bathroom and have a pee break, I'm going to spend an extra 90 seconds in the bathroom, right? Just these subtle ways of just starting to integrate, allowing ourselves to acknowledge and be with ourselves more and more throughout our day.
Yeah. Well, and to that point, it's like my work around, anything is like, I don't aspire to be perfect at well, there are parts of me that aspire to be perfect, actually. There's definitely parts of me that are like, we're going to be perfect at this. But like the wiser, more reasonable parts of me know that that's not possible anyway. So my intention is just to bring more consciousness to it. So if it is the kind of thing, like if I'm hot, we don't live in the kind of world where, that you can be completely attuned to your bodily needs and knowing in any given moment and fulfill them every second of the day. Like that's not reasonable. Yeah. And I don't know that that's even the goal. Like, I don't know that that's what this plane of existence is actually about. Yeah. So what I have really learned to do is, like you're saying, like if I have I have to power through kind of moment, or if I'm feeling something really big and I know, I'm in the parking lot at Trader Joe's and I actually don't have time to feel this right now. My work becomes just to be conscious of it, like you're saying, like just to be like, oh, wow, like I'm feeling something really intense and now is actually not the time or place for me to get to feel into this, but I'm going to make some time later, or like, okay, I have to power through in this moment. All right. So what am I going to do when this is finished to kind of, offer some restoration and replenishment to my system so that I'm not overriding myself unconsciously. And even just that, like bringing more conscious, like if you're on the couch on your phone and you're scrolling and you can't seem to stop, just acknowledging, wow, like I can't stop myself from scrolling right now. Like there must be something going on with me. I wonder what's going on. Just bringing that level of curiosity and conscious awareness is huge.
It's so huge.
Yeah. And
I just like naming it that's
totally.
That's neutral way of naming it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is awesome.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. Well, I love to just ask as we kind of wrap up this is kind of the big question, but what would you suggest to somebody as a specific practice or insight or something for them to keep in mind if they desire to live a more radically embodied life?
I think it actually is so much of what we were just talking about. In terms of bringing the two words that are sort of coming to me is practicing relating to yourself in a way that's like overflowing with curiosity and compassion, like overflowing with just like, what's going on with me today? And like, oh, like, what's that like? I worked with a therapist who would start our sessions. She would guide me into this just kind of like embodied check-in with myself to sort of reset from, whatever I'd just been working on or paying attention to come into our sessions. And she would pose this question of like, oh, like, and just wondering like, what is it like to be me today? And there was something about that.
I love that question.
I mean, it like brought something to me that I didn't know I was missing in terms of just like, oh yeah, what is it like to be me today? And some days it was like, oh, it's like hard and scary to be me today, and then other days it was like, oh, it feels really exciting and inspiring to be me today. And just bringing that kind of curiosity and compassion to whatever I was feeling, whatever was present in my body, whatever challenge I was moving through, whatever was going on for me, just opened so many doors in terms of being able to tend to any needs that might show up, or bring a level of like tenderness or softness to what I was experiencing. And it's so easy. I mean, I feel like just the vast majority of us live in this state of kind of like making ourselves wrong or feeling like we shouldn't feel how we're feeling, or, well, whatever, there's no time for that. I just got to suck it up and get on with it anyway. Some versions of all of that. And I just feel like to me, so much of embodiment work really requires, like being curious and compassionate with ourselves. And if we can start to just orient that way,
Mm-hmm.
versus being harsh or hard on ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
it makes anything and everything else so much easier.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. To orient more and more to ourselves through that state of curiosity and compassion. And I feel like that question of what is it like to be me today just so naturally invites that state. I
Yeah.
notice in myself that it just elicits, it's just like, oh yeah, what is it like to be me today? There's less versus maybe other ways of checking with myself. Just what I notice is there's less like attachment or clinginess to any
Yeah.
certain story or emotion that might come up. It's just more of like, oh yeah, like I'm just genuinely curious in the more
Yeah.
playful way.
Yeah.
Amazing. Amy, thank you so much. I mean, I could I could keep asking you questions because I just appreciate your insight and offerings and the way that you language and work in this realm.
Thank
So I
you.
appreciate you for being on and for sharing with all of us. How can somebody, if they want to find out more about your work and are ready to deprogram their patriarchy and
Oh,
all of that, how
girl.
can they find out more about you and your work?
Yeah. So, I'm like a little bit, I'm not the most obvious at this point with all of my offerings. Like I tell people, like, I want to send people to my website, but my website's also like in desperate need of a makeover, but just go there and just know that I know that it's not great. Just tell people that, because like my website, it's just purely functional. And I'm like, it's not the best place, but it's also just my internet home for the time being. So amyyoungcoaching.com is my website.
Okay.
If you want to find me on Instagram, I'm probably most active there in terms of social media. My handle is Amy Young Co, Amy Young CO.
Yeah.
And through the, those places you can find my podcast or my videos or, workshops and things that I'm running or programs I have coming up. So getting on my email list, all that good stuff.
So we'll make sure I'll have all those linked in the show notes so people can easily find them.
Thank you.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah, to go check out Amy's work. And any last words, thoughts that you want to share before we wrap up?
No, just well, one, I just want to say thank you so much for having me. I love getting to have these conversations. And, I believe so wholeheartedly in the work that you're doing with folks in the world. And and for anyone who's listening or wanting to deepen into, any of the things that we're talking about, just know that, sort of actually, Emily, it's like what you said to me at the beginning, like it's courageous to go inward in this way. And it's courageous to decide you're going to inhabit yourself fully,
It is.
And part of doing that well, the way that, I understand it is really having this remembrance and reverence for our full physical vessel. So I'm just cheering anyone on out there who's even trying, because it counts for a lot.
Yeah. The trying is the doing. It is totally. Yeah. It is courageous. Awesome. Thank you again, Amy. Thank you everyone for listening and tuning in. And I hope that, you get to choose any takeaways that you take, but just that encourages you, or what Amy said inspires you to just keep a state of more curiosity and compassion for yourself. So, all right. Take care, everyone.